Um, Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this World's Quality Week webinar. Our World's Quality Week theme, as you may know, is Quality, Think Differently. For those who don't know me, my name's Neil O'Doherty and I'm the chair of the CQI Avon Network. I'm also the chair of QS12, which amongst other standards, looks after the ISO 9001 standards. But that's not the one we're here for today. This afternoon we'll be hearing about the upcoming revision of the ISO 9000 fundamentals, quality management fundamentals and vocabulary standard from Graham Watson. Graham is the chair of QS11 and has played a key role in the working group that has developed the draft of the ISO 9000 revision. If I could ask, we will be inviting questions. If I can ask if those are placed in the Q&A box rather than in the chat, because if they go in the chat, there's a good chance they might get missed. And then when Graham has come to the end of speaking, I will then try my best to field those questions in the order that they appear. If I could also ask if we could keep the questions to the topic of the ISO 9000 revision and not any other standard. I'm obviously very aware, as I'm sure we are, that 9001 is currently at the draft international stage, so working a little behind where Graham is with the ISO 9000 standard. But for this session, if we keep it to questions on this topic, that will be great. And with that, I am going to hand over to Graham. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Neil, and also thank you very much to the CQI for inviting us along today and giving us an opportunity to talk about ISO 9000 and its revision. I've been involved, as Neil said, in the development of the standard for quite some time, and hopefully I will be able to paint a picture that will help you understand it. So why is ISO 9000 important? I've got some quotes here, not from me, but from probably one of the biggest users of ISO 9000, which is ISO 9001 itself. And the first one is from the current 2015 version. It's from clause 2, and it says, the following documents in whole or in part are normatively referenced in this document and are indispensable for its application. And that's in the 2015 version of ISO 9000. It refers to, sorry, there's a mistake. It should say ISO 9000 2015. Glad to get the mistake over with early. And those words have been in ISO 9001 since 2015, since that issue was released. And their words, indispensable. So indispensable to me conveys the message that is actually important. The following two are extracts from the DIS version of 9001, which, as Neil said, is currently still being developed. And from clause 2, the following documents are referred to in the text in such a way that some or all of their content constitutes requirements of this document. So in that, they're saying the relevant bits of ISO 9000 are actually part of ISO 9001. And in clause 3, for the purposes of this document, the terms and definitions given in ISO, it refers to CD because this is the development version, apply. So given those two statements, you can see that to understand ISO 9001, it's necessary to understand ISO 9000. I'm not sure exactly how many people have read 9000 when they were implementing ISO 9001, but anecdotally, it's not all that many. It's not read in the same way. And the other bit of anecdotal evidence is that those extracts come from clause 2 and clause 3. And I've been told, I'm sure it can't possibly be true, but people actually read ISO 9001 from clause 4 onwards. So national standard bodies are very reluctant to divulge their sales figures, but it's widely accepted, I think, that sales of 9001 far exceed the sales of 9000. I do have evidence from one national standards body that for the overall sales of the 2015 standards, only 10% of the sales were of 9000 compared to 9001. So there's a large disparity between the two. So what hopefully for those 90% who haven't bought 9000, what hopefully I'll be able to do in this presentation is to get you to think differently, not just about quality, but about ISO 9000 and the important role it plays. Further to those extracts from 9001, ISO 9000 is cited as a normative reference by 23 of the standards developed by TC 176. And for those who don't know, TC 176 is the technical committee of ISO that is responsible for quality management and quality assurance standards. But importantly, the reputation of ISO 9000 goes beyond TC 176 standards, and it's also cited as a normative reference by numerous other standards. Unfortunately, I have no figures for that, but we know that to be correct. So if it's that important, what's so special about it? What does it contain? The first item on this list is the quality management principles. They're not new, they've been around for a long time. They've been in the 2015 version of the standard as well, but bearing in mind, indispensable for understanding these form the basis of the development of the standards in quality management. ISO 9000 also contains fundamentals of quality management. And I'll explain a little bit more about all these things individually afterwards. And most importantly, it contains the vocabulary of quality management. I'll stress this is as seen by ISO, but that's what we're talking about here. It also got a little bit of guidance on how you can develop a QMS using those fundamental concepts and quality management principles. And the main aim of ISO 9000 is to help users, that's you hopefully, understand those fundamental principles and concepts and the vocabulary of quality management so that you can effectively and efficiently implement a quality management system and realize value from quality management and quality management system standards. So let's go through each of those parts in turn. The quality management principles. I'm sure you all know what there are. There are 7 of them. They're customer focus, leadership, engagement of people, process approach, improvement, evidence-based decision-making, and relationship management. I'm not going to go into all of those in detail in this presentation. You better buy the standard to find out. But they act as essential guidance that applies universally to the quality management system of any organization. And although they can be considered separately, they are actually interconnected and mutually dependent when they're implemented within an organization. And for each of those 7 quality management principles, ISO 9000 provides a statement outlining the principle, says this is what it is, an explanation of why that principle is important to your organization and your quality management system, the key advantages associated with it, and also provides suggested actions you can take to apply the principle effectively. The concepts, the fundamentals, they're presented in 2 groups. There are fundamental concepts that are integral to the understanding of quality management in general. They have been revised in this version or the forthcoming version of the standard. And I'll tell you what they are. So there's 10 fundamentals: quality management, quality management system, quality assurance, culture, quality control, quality planning, process management, risk-based thinking, and it's continual improvement and organizational quality culture. So those are the first one, and then also based on the additional concepts that are described, so things that were not in a previous version of 9000, they rely on the efforts, the work that's been done elsewhere within TC 176 in order to identify other concepts, things which are more relevant to current thinking in quality management. So there are 11 of those, and they are contacts of an organization, interested parties, integrated management system, circular economy, emerging technologies, change management, customer experience, knowledge management, information management, people aspects, and business continuity. And for each concept, there is a concise description of what it is and why it's important. But a word of caution, in 9000, it's not and never was intended as a comprehensive textbook on the subject. So they give an outline, they give a flavor, but they don't provide chapter and verse on them. They put them in the context of quality management. There is a section on guidance on developing a quality management system. So this guidance proposes how a well-managed, a well-planned QMS, based on the framework that integrates the established principles and concepts relevant to quality management, can help an organization realize their objectives. So it builds on the quality management principles and the fundamentals that I've described earlier. Probably the largest section, and a very significant section, is the vocabulary. The terms and definitions within 9000 provide a common language for quality management. So why is that important? Because we use language to communicate, and we use language to understand what we're talking about. So by having definitions that apply across the whole family of standards developed by TC 176, the concepts that each definition describe will conjure up exactly the same mental view of everybody when they read it. And this is the important part. Within each organization, within countries, within families, we all have our own language we use. And if everybody spoke in their own language, we'd probably be using the same words, but conjuring up a different idea of what it was we were talking about. So this is why the vocabulary section in 9000 is so important, because when you see a term used in a standard, it has the specific meaning that is contained within its definition in 9000. You can call it what you like where you are, but if you're using the language of TC 176, you need to understand the meanings that are given in the definitions. So 9000 2026, that's what it will be, will contain the terms and definitions that apply to all quality management and QMS standards developed by TC 176. So that amounts to, I think the figure is 171, but 170 definitions. So those definitions say, here is the specific meaning, the unique meaning applied to that concept as used in TC 176 standards. And you have to understand that meaning when you read the term in those standards. They are arranged in conceptual order because they're arranged in the order in which they interrelate to each other. But there is also an alphabetical index at the back of the standard, which helps people find stuff. But the reason why terms are arranged in conceptual order is that if they were listed in alphabetical order in the standard, as soon as you translate it to another language, they would have to be in a different order, and you would lose the relationship between the concepts that each of those definitions describes. So in the annex, there is a set of concept diagrams on which the thematic grouping of the terms in clause 3 is based. And I should note, although I said it contains all the terms and definitions from TC 176 standards, there are 3 standards which are, if you like, sector-specific applications of ISO 9001. They are very, very specific to each subject, and they are not included in 9000. So what are the main changes between what we have and know from 2015 and what will be coming out next year? Well, firstly, the title's changed. For a long time, the title has been Quality Management Systems, Fundamentals and Vocabulary. And within Subcommittee 1, which is responsible for this document, we think that the new content is more appropriately described as relating to quality management, not specifically and exclusively quality management systems. So the title has now changed to Quality Management Fundamentals and Vocabulary to better represent that enhanced content. So the additions have been made to the fundamentals. Those are the things I read out earlier, dividing them into 2 groupings. So what we call the fundamental quality management concepts and additional concepts relative to quality management. And I say those additional ones are addressing the emerging trends in quality. Terms have been added. definitions have been added. I think the 2015 version of the standard contains 146 definitions. And as I've said, this new standard will contain 170. And because of some of the changes to the complement of definitions, the concept diagrams in Annex A are restructured to illustrate more appropriately the conceptual relationship between them, and consequently the order in which they appear in the document will be different to the order in which they appear in the 2015 version. And I believe that is all really I wanted to outline. So thank you very much. I hope I managed to persuade you to think differently about ISO 9000. And I'm prepared to try and answer any of your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Graham. Not really seeing any questions that are specifically related to. We've got one here related to the content, so I'm going to come to that one first. There are some other questions that are more related. Well, it's more related to 14,001, so I might come back to that. I see that there's an answer so that someone's attempted to answer that. So I've got a question here. How does the revised ISO 9000 strengthen the foundation for future quality thinking and practice? In what ways might these updated principles and definitions help organisations innovate while staying true to the fundamentals of quality?
Well, that's a challenge.
Yes.
But
So,
one of the difficulties I think with standardization is how do you standardize the future? Because to an extent, standards are a little bit retrospective. They're trying to make more consistent what you do at the moment. And I think the one big difference is we recognize with the emerging trends is things are changing and things are likely to be changing at an increasing rate. That's something that we can't really control, but we can be prepared to deal with it. And I think the revisions, certainly in 9000, are aimed at getting people to think a little bit differently. It's the theme of this week's World Quality Week as well, is think differently about how we do things and how we can respond. And that's why the new concepts have been introduced.
We have a question here from Satish. I think what Satish is asking is when the month and year of publication, I think is what he says. When will standard month and year? I think this means the month of publication. When when when
When
it's
will it come
anticipated.
out?
Yeah,
Well,
basically, yeah.
I believe the initial intent was to publish in January next year, but because of some changes that ISO Central Secretariat are requiring at relatively short notice, we're probably going to have to make one or two changes to the structure of the document. And we have a meeting coming up next week to agree how to take that forward. But it's likely, the aim is more likely that that 9000 will be available in March
Thank you very much.
26.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. From John Simpson, we have a question. Are there any changes to the 7 quality management principles?
The changes are subtle, they're not extensive. What I would like to say about the quality management principles, though, is who owns them. Although they're published in ISO 9000 and have been, as I said earlier, without getting too tied up in the organizational structure of ISO, but TC 176 has got 3 subcommittees, and subcommittee 1 is the one that has responsibility for 9000. However, the content of the section, the clause on the quality management principles, is actually given to us. It's given to us because it's developed jointly by representatives of the 3 subcommittees and the TC itself. And I think that's very important. So it's not just subcommittee 1's version of events. It's been developed, challenged, refined, challenged again by that group that represents all vested interest in TC 176. So the changes, I know because I did a comparison, are very few, but there are some subtle changes. But the title of the principles are the same as they were before. The general intent is the same. Some of the detail is a little bit different.
Okay. So then I have a question. We have a lot of questions around the implementation dates of the change, which I think this is more of a question that is related to the ISO 9001 standard, which will be, obviously that's going to be public. The objective is to be publishing that standard um, in September 2026. So it's a few months after ISO 9000. It's a reminder that ISO 9, and there's also a question here about ISO 9000, whether it's replacing 9001. That's not the case. They're two different. So ISO 9001 is the requirements standards, and ISO 9000 is the normative reference. It contains the normative references that are used by that standard, as well as a lot more fundamentals and concepts and vocabulary. So ISO 9000 is not a standard that you implement, but you need it when you're implementing, or when you're implementing ISO 9001. Just to clarify the very important relationship between those two standards. So there won't be any need for any action in January 2026. I hope that's answering a few questions that are appearing. Is there anything else you wanted to say to that topic, Graham?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you raised the point. I'm allowed to say I get annoyed, but I do get very annoyed when people say they're certificated to ISO 9000. Nobody has been or ever will be having a management system that's certificated or assessed against ISO 9000. It's ISO 9001. But you know what I said about terminology, and you could call it what you like in your own sphere. But there is a world of difference between the content of 9000, which is what I've outlined, and as you rightly said, Neil, 9001, which is a requirement standard for a quality management system. Big difference.
Yeah. So then I've got a question. I'd argue that the job of ISO 9000 and 9001, etc., is to reflect best QM practice, not to dictate it. Do you think ISO 9000 and the QM principles reflect best practice, or could it be said that the ISO is a bit stuck in the mud here?
Well, I honestly don't know how to answer that one. The only people really to assess best practice are the people who use them. And maybe a word about how ISO standards are produced. I was once asked who writes ISO standards. I'm retired now, but when I was working, I would take that question back to my workplace, which was a very large organization in the UK. And I would ask the quality practitioners, and they would say, oh, why ISO, of course. And that maybe it's not too surprising that people come up with that answer. But ISO standards are not written by anybody employed by ISO. ISO set the rules by which standards are written and developed, but they don't develop them themselves. The actual standards are developed by experts who are nominated by the national standards bodies or by liaison groups who have an affiliation to the technical committee responsible for the documents. So the people who feed in we'll call them best practice, into the standards are practicing experts. If I say people like you and me, they're real life people. They're not office-based bureaucrats who live in a skyscraper in Geneva somewhere. They are experts who are there representing their national standards bodies. And why are they on the national standards bodies? Because they are representing their organizations or institutions as members of the national committees of those relating to those documents. So the best practice is not put in by ISO, it's put in by nominated experts.
So our next question, I'm just have to focus on the question answer. I am seeing that the questions are appearing in the chat, but I'm going to focus on the question and answer. The next question is, how can we make use of those new additional fundamentals in line with the new trends to effectively think differently or outside the box, and make a difference by adding value on the day-by-day quality professional life? So how can we make use of those?
Well, I think it's important to understand what the principles are. They give you a vision of something. They don't tell you how to do it. Although having said that, there are in the description of the quality management principles, it does give you an inkling of how you can use them. But the practical application is not something ISO 9000 can do for you. The practical application is done by you and your organization. So use the principles, use the concepts. You then have to apply your thinking to make them work for you. And this may sound a bit glib, but there's no universal fix-all medicine that's going to work for everybody. You'll need to think of it in your own context, because the worst thing any standard can do is to say, here's what you have to do. Now, that's actually what most people like. They like to be told what to do. But, the theme of this week's World Quality Week is think differently. So think differently. We can't think differently for you. You have to do that yourself.
Great. So then we have a question. Why? I think it's asking why the decision was made to drop the word system. So we've gone from quality management systems to quality management. In the fundamentals and vocabulary. So
okay, that's relatively straightforward. When I said it describes concepts and vocabulary related to all of the TC 176 standards, within TC 176 currently, I think apart from the three applications that I mentioned, there's only 9001 and what will become 9002, and there is a new management system standard for measurement management systems, which is imminently ready for issue. So if we said it's just the vocabulary for quality management systems, that ignores the fact that there are a whole load of other supporting standards developed by TC 176, which in themselves are not management system requirement standards. So they provide guidance on, they are supporting the application of several of the requirements and one or two other things. There's a whole load on dealing with customer satisfaction, for example. And if we just restrict the subject to quality management systems, we're in effect saying, hey, you're not that important. And yes, they actually are, which is why the dropping of systems is a much broader or statement of a much broader intent of what 9000 addresses.
Okay, and then we have a question. Do you consider the language of ISO 9000 to reflect evolving concepts such as systems performance, culture, and co-creation of value? Um,
Some difficult ones there.
yeah,
There is a some the concept of culture has been introduced.
yep,
Um, that's definitely the other ones. Um, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure. This is the thing. When some of these things I'm comfortable with because I know a little bit about them, and some of them I think, whoa, I haven't heard of that
yeah,
before. Um, so if they are included in 9000, that's because experts have said, please put this in, and there's been a discussion. And then it's not just a case of if it's suggested it goes in, the working group developing the standard has to reach consensus on whether something is there or not. And it doesn't mean full agreement, but you just have to get to the point where nobody can violently disagree with the change being made, whether that change is an addition or a subtraction. Um, so it's the question. I think I can deal with part of it. The other bit's very difficult.
yes. So I think culture is quite clear, but what we mean by systems performance or co-creation of value, I don't think we're so clear on that. And as you say, yes, culture is something that has um, is now there, but not the other two. Um, so just moving on to the next question, which uh, is asking to elaborate a little bit on the difference between 9000 and 9001. I'm not sure if this question was asked before I spoke to that topic, and also 9002 and 9004. And perhaps I can speak a little bit to this one, Graham, and give you a bit of a breather. Is that okay?
You by all means, you're the expert.
So 9002 is also under revision. So the current version is guidelines for the implementation of ISO 9001 2015. So it naturally follows that that standard will need to be revised to align with the forthcoming revision of ISO 9001. Um, so that standard will then become a go from being a technical specification, an ISO TS, to a full ISO standard. So again, it's not a management system standard. It's not something that you can certify to. It provides guidance. It suggests ways in which you might want to meet the requirements of ISO 9001, because the requirements just standard just says what you have to do. It doesn't say how or give you any suggestions of how. Uh, and ISO 9002 will go some way to serving that purpose. But as Graham has rightly pointed out, it has to come from your organisation and what is right and uniquely appropriate. There are no two organisations alike. Every organisation has its own unique context and its own way in which it is going to meet those requirements. And then ISO 9004 is a much broader standard. Again, it's not a certifiable management system standard, which looks at the quality of that, from a more organisational perspective, um, and yeah, and for sustained success of an organization. So yeah, so that's the interrelationship between the four standards that have been asked about there. Um, but this specifically today, we're talking about 9,000, about the fundamentals and vocabulary. Um, I've also seen questions, some other questions related to 9,001, but I'm going to stick with that for now. Um, the next question is digital um, technologies have got the potential to fundamentally change the ways organizations work, but they don't seem to be reflected in the standards. Should 9,000 take changing technologies into greater accounts? I mean, this is a conversation that we have quite a lot, I think. So,
Should ISO 9000? Well, it does, but the main challenge with changing technologies is they're changing.
mm,
And as soon as you put something specific about a changing technology, given the life cycle of these standards, they're from cradle to grave, they're typically 10 years. In 10 years' time, from 2026, who knows what the world will be like? And we can put stuff specifically in about things that are happening today, and who knows how soon they will be out of date. So, what we can do is reflect that technology does change, and actually, in quality management, it's not something you can ignore. So, how do you take advantage of it? And I think that's the way that those things would be included. So, yes, one of the things that ISO are actually doing, which I believe in terms of the relationship between ISO 9000 and certainly 9001, they're introducing this thing called ISO Smart. And I've seen a prototype of what it may look like. What it will look like, I don't know. But my understanding is that if you buy them, because they're not going to be given away, you get an electronic version of, let's say, 9001, and you hover your mouse over the text, and if it's a term that's defined in 9000, up will pop the definition. I think, well, this is exceedingly useful, because one of the challenges of reading, let's say, 9001, because that's what we're talking about, is, well, of the words on this page, which ones are actually really are actually terms for which there is a definition in 9000? Because as they appear on paper, it's not obvious. I did some analysis way back in 2016, I think it was, when the 2015 versions had come out. I went through 9001 to try and identify where terms were actually used in the text and how many times. And of then there was, I think, 146 terms defined in 9000. Something like 76 of them were used in 9001. But I was probably in a very privileged position, because having done the analysis, I knew which they were, but there was no other way of other people knowing what they were. And this is something which I believe ISO Smart will fix. You hover your mouse over it, the text, and it'll say, oh, hang on, this is talking about quality management system. Oh, well, I know that's a defined term. It'll light up and up will pop. Here's the definition of quality management system. So in order to aid your understanding of, well, what exactly are they talking about using these words on the page, this will be, I think, very helpful. So here's an example of where, whether you call it emerging technology, digital technology, its technology, other than using your eyes and a piece of paper, would actually help you understand what, and what's important is what was in the minds of the people who wrote the document when they wrote it, because that's what's being written about, not what you think. And I always say reading a standard is not like looking at a painting or reading a novel, because if you read a novel, the author will put some words and he'll give you a few clues as to what's happening, but you have to fill the blanks. Oh, it's a so and so, so and so. This is what it looks like. He doesn't say the car's red, but I know it's red. Well, for a standard, that's not really all that good. That's not really all that helpful. You need to know what was intended, particularly with a requirement standard. This requirement says, da, da, da. What have I got to do? What is the requirement to be satisfied? So emerging technology, something's coming along, which I've seen the preview. I think it'll be extremely helpful.
I'm going to jump one here because it's very much linked to this, and I'm just going to give a very brief answer, which I'm going to kind of turn the question the other way around. So the question is, have the areas of quality 4.0, including AI and machine learning, had an impact on quality fundamentals? And I'm going to turn that question around, if I may, and say, how can we make how can we make the quality fundamentals have an impact on quality 4.0? How can we have an impact on AI? How can we have an impact on machine learning? I think that's the way. Any new technology can appear, and we start sort of looking at the risks and opportunities around that, and how we apply the fundamentals of quality to it. They don't change, although technology moves. So I'm just going to throw that out there as how I would respond to uh, that question. Um, so I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Graham, because we've already talked at talked at length on sort of new concepts and stuff.
Well, the challenge I'm faced with when you mention something like quality 4.0, I haven't got a clue what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm sure if you asked several people, they would come up with something that was very similar, but not quite the same. I've missed out on quality 3.0 and quality 5 as well.
Mm.
So I think what if I sort of, and apologize for trying to be flippant about it, here are different ways of thinking about quality. How do you get that different way of thinking into a standard? Well, it takes a bit of time. There has to be this move. And what you have to be careful against, not saying it's wrong, but be careful of trying to standardize something which is changing very dramatically, because you'll never keep up. So what you have to do, I think, is provide the facility to enable the progress of change to be embraced, if I can put it that way, by people, by organizations, and not constrain it. And so the worst thing you could do possibly is constrain it by writing it in a standard. Well, we can't do that because so and so says it's this. That's not how I think it should be. I think everything now needs to be not turbulent, because turbulence is bad, but it has to have the freedom to grow and be dynamic.
Right. Thank you. So then we've got, of course, the standards cannot think differently for us, but grateful to know which new fundamentals of ISO 9000 can help us to think differently. And also adds thanks to Graham for experience, insight, and sharing as a suggestion.
Well, that's very kind. Whoever said that, I will, the check's in the post. Thank you very much. So the first part of that question was how,
Yeah, grateful to know which new
Okay, which ones?
fundamentals of 9,000s can help us to think differently, is the question.
Um, well, the glib answer again is all of them, because they weren't there before. So, so they are feeding in new thoughts on concepts that are relevant to quality management. So circular economy, for instance, is one. Now you might say, hang on a minute, why is circular economy in a quality management document? I thought that was to do with environmental management. Well, it isn't if it relates to designing your processes, not necessarily to be beneficial for the environment, but clearly that is the case. But in terms of any quality management system which is inefficient and ineffective, I argue is a bad one. And what the circular economy is a way of actually thinking things differently so that they have a beneficial impact on quality. And generally, that's the ability to supply things that people actually want in a consistent way. So there's one, but there are others that, again, these things, some will be new to you, some you'll know about. And you say, well, why has this been added? Why everybody knows about that? Well, actually, not everybody does.
Thank you. I think we're getting to we're approaching time now. I know we haven't got to I know we haven't got to all of the questions. Just seen someone asking, will this recording be shared later? It will be available via the CQI um, website. Um, just before we do, I have seen a question about sort of getting involved in standards development, and it's been said, I think, here and elsewhere, that standards are developed by those in the room. So, given we've got quite a global audience here, which is absolutely fantastic, by the way, um, uh, the first port of call in many cases will be your own national standards body in the country where you are. Um, the Regarding the CQI, because I think there was a bit about getting involved by the CQI, and in that case it would be that would be via Alexander Woods. If you and if you're in UK and you wanted to approach BSI, it's good if you are representing a particular body or organisation that will nominate you to be um, part to be representing that organisation. Um, but I would encourage people to approach and to get involved. The CQI also invites everyone to comment on standards during the commenting phases. So
And I,
and I can see I've just seen a message from Katie as well saying you can contact us via policy@quality.org to find out more about getting involved with standards writing. So
can I just add something? Sorry, can I just add something
yeah,
which I think is important? First of all, delighted that if this presentation has inspired people to get involved, that's a tick from me. I'm very pleased about that. Secondly, how do you get involved? First of all, you have to have it in you. It's not easy, but it's actually very rewarding to get involved. But it's really helpful if you've got support of the people you work with currently. So talk to your boss if you're employed in a company, get them interested, because there's two things that come out from that. One is you're likely to be more benefit to your employer if you've shown that interest in the first place. And then once you've got their support, much easier with their support, because a lot of it is financial and time. It does take effort in time as well. And then having got that support, everything Neil said, I would endorse. That's the way to do
yeah,
it.
That's a good point, Graham. Thanks for adding that. Yeah, I mean, having your employer's support is really, really important that they, because it does involve freeing you up to have the time to participate. It can be both, it can be time consuming, and obviously there can be a financial aspect as well. So having that support behind you to be involved, I think, it's a really important point. So thank you very much. Thanks to and I see. I just going to see what we've seen from Sam Somerville here as well, saying how fantastic to have this focus on ISO 9000, which is such an important but often undervalued standard. And I'm going to set as the ISO 9001 man, I am going to really reiterate that comment. ISO 9000, it is a normative reference. You cannot implement ISO 9001 properly without ISO 9000. So thank you, Graham, and thank you everyone for taking the time to participate in this presentation, and hope to see you at many more, and enjoy the rest of this fantastic World Quality Week, and keep thinking differently.